I'd like to call the Minister to move motion number 1 on social security, with which it will be convenient also to debate motion number 2. Minister Kit Malthouse.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, and with the forbearance of the Right Honourable Lady for any prior confusion, I beg to move that the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2018 and the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2018, which were laid before this House on the 15th of January, be approved. In my view, you'll be pleased to hear, Mr. Speaker, that the provisions in both orders are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. Mr. Speaker, today we are debating the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order and the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pension Increase Order. I will first deal with the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, which is an entirely technical matter that we attend to in this House each year, and that I do not imagine we will need to spend that much time on today. This statutory instrument provides for contracted-out defined benefit occupational pension schemes to increase members' guaranteed minimum pensions that accrued between 1988 and 1997 by 3%. Mr. Speaker, turning to those rates that are included in the Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2018, this Government continues to stand by its commitment to the triple lock guarantee, which means that this year the basic state pension and the full rate of the new state pension will go up by the increase in prices at 3%, as outlined in the autumn budget on the 22nd of November last year. We will increase the pension credit standard minimum guarantee by more than the growth in earnings to match the cash increase in the basic state pension, and we will increase benefits to meet additional disability needs and carer benefits by 3% in line with prices. First, the basic state pension. The Government's continuing commitment to the triple lock for the length of this Parliament means the rate of the basic state pension for a single person will increase by £3.65p to £125.95p a week from April 2018. As a result, from April 2018, the full basic state pension will be £1,450 a year higher than it was in April 2010. We estimate that the basic state pension will be around 18.5% of average earnings, one of the highest levels relative to earnings for over 2 decades. The new state pension. In 2016, the Government introduced the new state pension for people reaching their state pension age from the 6th of April 2016 onwards, with the aim of making it clearer to people at a much younger age how much they are likely to get and providing a solid base for their saving and retirement planning. We are committed to increasing the new state pension by the triple lock for the duration of this Parliament, and as a result, the full rate of the new state pension will increase by 3% this year, meaning that from April 2018, the full rate of the new state pension will increase by £4.80 to £164.35p a week, around 24.2% of average earnings. The benefits of the triple lock-up rating will also be passed on to the poorest pensioners through an increase in the standard minimum guarantee in pension credit to match the cash rise in the basic state pension. This will be paid for through an increase in the savings credit threshold. To match the cash increase in the basic state pension, the standard minimum guarantee will rise by 2.29%, which exceeds growth in earnings of 2.2%. This will mean that from April 2018, the single-person threshold of this safety net benefit will rise by £3.65 a week to £163. If I could just finish, on the additional state pension, this year state earnings-related pension schemes will rise in line with prices by 3%. Protected payments in the new state pension will be increased in the same manner. Consistent government support for pensioners has seen the percentage of pensioners living in poverty fall dramatically in the past few decades, now standing close to the lowest rate since comparable records began. By all means.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and he'll know that state pension is deducted from pension credit, leaving those pensioners no better off than if they hadn't contributed to qualify for a state pension. And because state pension is also taxable, if other income is brought into the household, the pensioner may have to both pay tax on it and see it deducted from their pension credit, so that they could actually be worse off than if they hadn't contributed for a state pension. Will the Minister say what the Government is doing to address this long-standing inequity?
Well, there have been significant measures taken by the government to deal with pensions, and in particular pensioner poverty, over the last few years. And of course, we've seen it fall from something approaching 46% to around 16% over the last few years. One measure in particular, which will have benefited many millions of pensions, of course, is raising the personal tax threshold, which has taken millions of people out of the tax system altogether, and particularly those who are on fixed income, such as pensions. I'd like now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to turn to disability benefits, if I may. The Government will continue to ensure that carers and those who cannot work and those that have additional needs as a result of disability get the support they need. We continue to follow the principle in our welfare reforms that more of the money should get to the people who need it most. This results in disability living allowance, attendance allowance, carers allowance, incapacity benefit and the personal independent payment, all rising by 3% in line with prices from April 2018. In addition, disability-related and carer premiums paid with pension credit and working age benefits will also increase by 3%, as will the employment and support allowance support group component and the limited capability for work and work-related activity element of universal credit. All in all, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Government will be spending an extra £4.2 billion in 2018-19 on uprating benefits and pension rates. And with this spending, we are upholding our commitment to the country's pensioners by maintaining the triple lock on their state pension. We are helping the poorest pensioners who count on pension credit and providing support to disabled people and carers, and I commend these orders to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is, as on the order paper, Shadow Secretary of State, Debbie Abraham.
Thank you for that little hiatus there, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to focus my remarks initially on the draft Social Security Benefit Upratings Order and then move on to the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order. The draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2018 provides the annual uprating for social security entitlements excluded from the Government's freeze to levels of social security enacted in the Welfare Reform and Work Act of 2016. This includes, as we've heard, attendance allowance, carers allowance, disability living allowance, personal independence payment, industrial injuries benefit, bereavement benefits, incapacity benefit and severe disablement allowance. This year, the Secretary of State proposes to uprate these limited social security entitlements by inflation under the Consumer Prices Index measure, which currently stands at 3%, together with the new state pension in accordance with the triple lock and pension credit. I will not delay the measures to increase the new state pension and the adequacy of the social security provision provided by the uprating of payments in this order. However, while I welcome the upratings contained in this order, this needs to be seen in the context of the support that is not being provided or is not being uprated, as well as the Government's wider approach to social security as a whole. The uprating order doesn't include child benefit, job seekers allowance, employment and support allowance, income support, housing benefit, local housing allowance rates, child tax credit, working tax credit, and the majority of comparable elements of universal credit. The Government's decision to limit the cap on uprating to 1% between 2013 and 2015 and the subsequent freeze on the vast majority of social security payments has seen low-income households suffer a significant deterioration in the adequacy of social security support. The freeze to payments and support is having an extremely detrimental impact upon millions of people on low incomes across the UK. Over the last year, inflation has more than doubled, hitting a 5-year high of 3.1% in December 2017, and currently it stands at 3%. But the payments subject to uprating were uprated by just 1% last year, with the vast majority of social security payments remain frozen. To put that into context, research by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation shows that the price of essentials has risen 3 times faster than wages over the past 10 years. Food prices have increased by 4.1%, transport costs are up 4.5%, and clothing and footwear has risen by 3%. People are suffering a continued increase of their cost of living, exacerbated by the stagnation of wages and rise in insecure work caused by this Government's inadequate economic policies. Last year, in-work families on the national living wage saw minimum costs rise faster than their net income because in-work payments are frozen and because any rises in pay are clawed back through tax credit reductions. While millions of families are seeing their income fall in real terms, the wealth of the richest few continues to soar, with FTSE 250 bosses seeing their pay rise by 11% in the last 2 years alone. In spite of promises to tackle these burning injustices, the income gap between the richest and poorest society has almost doubled. Britain's top bosses are paid on average 165 times more than a nurse, 140 times more than a teacher, and 312 times more than a care worker. Research from the Resolution Foundation shows that the poorest families will see their incomes drop by an average of 2% by 2021, while at the same time the richest fifth of households will see their wealth increase by 5%. It's clear that the government's cuts to social security support are pushing more and more people into poverty. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has called on the government to end the freeze on social security payments, as has the Child Poverty Action Group, who state that the failure to uprate benefits in line with inflation is the biggest driver behind child poverty. Following the 2015 summer budget, the government's flagship Universal Credit Programme has saw cuts to the work allowance. This was on top of the scrapping the severe disability premiums, the imposition of the minimum income floor for the self-employed, and limiting child tax credit support to the first 2 children. As a result of these cuts and the freeze, not only is UC failing to make work pay, but instead of reducing poverty, it's actually exacerbating it. What is the Minister's assessment of... I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. She may also be aware of the difficulties that people are finding in claiming the childcare element of universal credit, the bureaucratic burdens that are compounding the freezes and cuts that she is talking about, which mean that families are unable to get the kind of childcare support that they used to be able to fund relatively easily under the tax credit system.
My honourable friend makes an excellent point. I mean, there are so many different aspects to the still inadequate response from the government about how they are going to fix universal credit. And she's just highlighted one we heard earlier in oral questions around the debacle about free school meals and how more children will be deprived of having a free school meal as a result of this. What is the Minister's assessment of the impact of the Social Security uprating cap upon poverty levels? Does he accept that Child Poverty Action Group's analysis that 1 million more children who will be pushed into poverty is a direct result of the cuts to UC? Does he accept the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report on the cumulative impact on disabled people, which estimates that a disabled adult will have lost, on average, £2,500 a year since 2010? Despite announcing a small amount of additional investment in the autumn budget to prop up universal credit, in reality the Chancellor has only reintroduced £1 for every £10 that was cut by his predecessor. Why is the government choosing not to uprate social security payments in a way that reflects the economic reality for those in most need? I remind members that the Child Poverty Action Group estimate that cuts to universal credit will force an additional 1 million children into poverty by 2020. The social security system should prevent people from getting into debt and poverty, not make things worse. By continuing the freeze on social security payments not included in this order, the government is subjecting 10.5 million households on average to a cut of £450 a year up to 2020. This order was a chance for the government to recognise the desperate reality for many of the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society, but they have failed to do so. As charities across the sector have been asking, will the Minister ensure the end of the freeze on other social security payments in next month's budget statement? The order allows for discretionary upratings to be made by the Minister where he deems it necessary and appropriate. I want to be clear that we welcome the Minister's decision to include a 3% uprating the work allowance element of universal credit in the list of discretionary upratings in these regulations. But with the reality of people's lives, demands more. But this again raises questions about the consistency of the government's argument to uprate some social security payments and not others. If the Minister believed that the work allowance element of universal credit should be uprated, as we do on this side of the House, can he explain why tax credits are not also being uprated by the same amount? Why is there this disparity? The government cut the work allowance elements of universal credit in 2015, yet subsequently the government has recognises the need to uprate it through the discretionary element of this legislation, although not to a level that reflects the reality of the rising costs of living and previous cuts. Is this an admission that they were wrong to cut work allowances in 2015? Moving on to the pensions elements of this uprating, I welcome the uprating of the state pension via the triple lock. I'm glad to see that this has survived given the government's indifference to it last year, but I want to put on the record concerns about the levels of public understanding of the new single-tier pension and the positive information the government has made available. As we know, there are both winners and losers as a result of the government's changes, and most new pensioners will not receive the full single-tier pension. Before its introduction, it was estimated that only around 22% of women and half of men reaching state pension age would be entitled to the full single-tier pension. Will the Minister update the House on this? In addition to the numerous social security payments subject to the government's benefit freeze and not uprated in this order, there are some very significant further omissions. Excuse me. While the state pension is being uprated, people who have frozen pensions are excluded from the uprating and will not see an increase in their state pension in line with inflation. Pensioners living abroad face very different circumstances depending on whether their country of residence has a reciprocal agreement with the UK for the uprating of state pensions. Pensioners in countries without this arrangement see their pensions frozen at their initial retirement level, which means the value of their pensions falls in real terms every single year. More than 500,000 people currently have their pensions frozen, mostly in Commonwealth countries such as India, Australia, Canada, parts of the Caribbean and New Zealand, and in countries with strong family historical links to the UK such as Pakistan and parts of Africa. We on this side of the House believe that their pensions should be protected in the same way the pensions of other UK citizens living abroad are in the future. Yet the government is choosing to withhold their pension uprating in this order from 550,000 recipients living outside the UK. This is a chance for the government to make an historic change to our pension system and support our policy to end future arbitrary discrimination against some British pensioners living overseas by rating in line with inflation from this point. Will the Minister look again at this issue and take action to address this inequality? Not only has the government failed to support pensioners living abroad, they have failed to address the current injustice faced by many millions of women born in the 1950s. It is important that the government not only recognises the real injustice that women born in the 1950s have been dealt as a result of their changes to pensions policy, but takes actions to remedy this injustice. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point, and I agree totally with her. There's millions of women in this country who've suffered discrimination because of this government's policies, in particular women born in the early 1950s, and the government could do something about it, and we could say this to the government: as long as they refuse to do something about it, we'll keep raising it.
My honourable friend speaks very strongly on behalf of his constituents and women who were born in the 1950s and what they're going through, and long may he continue to do so. There can be no doubt that women have borne the brunt of this government's cuts over the past 7 years, but that applies particularly to women born in the 1950s who have been dealt a real injustice with the accelerated increase in their state pension age. The government has no excuse not to bring forward retirement for women born in the 50s and early drawdown of their pension, as it is entirely cost neutral. Alongside our proposals for the extension of pension credit, these additional measures would mean that those affected by the government's chaotic mismanagement of state pension equalisation would have the option to retire earlier and allow for much needed financial support. The proposals for an early drawdown are an immediate action for the government, and they're in a position to implement, yet they refuse to do so. So I would be grateful if the Minister could explain exactly why this is the case. I want to be clear. that these proposals are a starter and don't in any way preclude further action or even compensation for this group of women. Will the Minister commit to reviewing their approach to pensions provision for women born in the 1950s, and will she release the original legal opinion on this contained in the pink files? In the context I have set out, a 3% uprating to some social security entitlements is unlikely to do much for those who are just about managing. As a matter of principle, this uprating should apply to all entitlements, not just the ones that the government has cherry-picked. In the meantime, although we regret the limit on the groups who will benefit from this uprating, we have to support the order, otherwise those identified will lose out. Moving on to the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, Madam Deputy Speaker, we support the uprating of the Guaranteed Minimum Pension in line with inflation as set out in this order. However, I want to cover some issues raised last year but that remain, in our opinion, unresolved around the new state pension arrangements that came into effect in April 2016. Under this old state pension, there were two main components, a basic state pension and a state earnings-related pension known as SERPs. People who paid national insurance contributions at the full rate built up a basic state pension, but an option was created in 1978 where an individual could contract out into another pension scheme, either voluntarily or via their employer on their behalf. And this was on the basis that the other scheme met certain criteria. Between 1978 and 1997, schemes that took on such new members were required to provide a guaranteed minimum pension. The guaranteed minimum pension system was discontinued by the government in 1997. In 2016, the government's introduction of the new state pension ended contracting out by replacing the additional state pension with a single tier. Working age people now have their existing state pension entitlement adjusted for previous periods of contracting out and transferred to the new state pension scheme. For people who have guaranteed minimum pension rights under an old pension scheme but reached retirement age after April 2016, the government no longer takes account of inflation increases to guaranteed minimum pensions when uprating people's new state pension. The changes mean any guaranteed minimum pensions accrued between 1978 and 1988 will not be uprated, and the scheme provider will uprate guaranteed minimum pensions built between 1988 and 1997 only to a maximum of 3% each year. The National Audit Office investigated the impact of the changes and concluded there will be some winners and some losers under the new arrangements, depending on the amount of time that people were contracted out into a scheme. Those with state pension has been pushed back because of the rise in state pension age will lose out on guaranteed minimum pensions inflation-linked increases that would have been received under the old rules. However, those who lose under the new rules may be able to build up additional entitlement to the state pension. The issue here, as is too often the case with the government, is a lack of clear information. The NAO stated in their report that some people are likely to lose out and they have not been able to find the information that they need. Why did the government fail to provide the necessary information to enable people to make informed decisions? The NAO also included that they were concerned that the department has limited information about who is affected by the impact of pension reforms on guaranteed minimum pensions. Will the Minister provide a much-needed update on the number of people affected since the legislation came into effect? What support is currently available to support people and their understanding of the changes? I hope that the Minister will take the opportunity to address all the issues I raised, both in the Social Security Upratings Order and the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, in his response. Thank you.
Neil Gray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to be able to set out the SNP's position on these orders this evening, turning first to the Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2018. You'll not be surprised, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I'm rather critical this evening. I've been speaking about what's covered in this order since I was elected almost 3 years ago. And this order is like the annual review of social security payments, everything from pensions to maternity allowances. It's like an annual review, except for so many it's not. There is no review on a number of social security benefits, as they are automatically frozen, regardless of the impact this has on the people who need the support to get by, regardless of the rise in household costs, regardless of the widespread opposition to the continuation of the freeze. Job seekers allowance, child and working tax credits, local housing allowance, income support, child benefit and the work-related activity group of employment support allowance are all frozen. This means people desperately seeking work, families with children, parents working hard but receiving poverty pay, sick or disabled people will all see their support frozen, despite their household costs rising significantly in the last year. In December, CPI hit 3%, meaning that while families in and out of work who need the support of the social security system to get by, will need to find extra money just to stand still. The Resolution Foundation has calculated that working families with 2 children will lose £315 a year as a result of the benefit freeze. The IFS have said that as a result of higher CPI rates, benefit entitlements will be reduced by an average of £450 per year by 2019-2020. We know that this is the worst decade for wage growth in 210 years, meaning that people in work, but also in receipt of social security support, have their chances cut off at both ends. As costs rise, they cannot rely on work or social security to help keep up. And that by all means.
Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Of course, there's another issue in this, and I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman will come to that, and that's the question of the third child of the so-called rape tax. I notice that nothing's been done about that.
I absolutely concur with the Honourable Member. He's absolutely right to point out one of the most iniquitous and most disgraceful policies that have come out of this government, and one that, as he says, no action has been forthcoming to address. And that is part of the reason why the End Child Poverty Coalition has said that the 4-year benefits freeze has been the reason that we see more than half of all children in the UK's poorest areas growing up in poverty. Earlier, the new minister, defended the benefit freeze at question time by saying that in order to overturn the benefit freeze would require primary legislation. I say, bring that legislation and let us vote on it, as the evidence quite clearly shows the damage that is being done, and I would challenge any government backbencher to vote for its continuation in the face of such evidence. And it is time to end the freeze and lift children out of poverty. Apart from anything else, the UK Government doesn't need to do this, even by its own reasoning. Figures obtained by the SNP from the House of Commons Library show that while the 4-year benefit freeze introduced by the Tory Government in April 2016 was intended to result in £3.5 billion of cuts by 2019-20, that figure could now be £5.2 billion due to rising inflation. And then we have the decision not to up the bereavement support payment in line with inflation, which is completely unacceptable while the costs of funerals continues to rise at an incredible rate. But what is worst is the DWP's own figures show that 75% of the recipients of the new combined payment who have children will be worse off, rising to 88% of those who are bereaved with children and in work.
Shocking.
The resignation of the entire Social Mobility Commission Board in December should have been seen as the climax of the UK government-driven poverty crisis. Instead, today, we see it driven on. There are some welcome developments and elements before us today. I'm glad that ministers have used their discretion to uprate statutory sick pay, statutory maternity and paternity pay, adoption pay, and statutory shared parental pay will also all rise by 3%. This is perhaps in light of the report from the European Committee on Social Rights, which I quizzed ministers on earlier and who appeared to know little about what I was talking about. It is found that, found that social security provisions for the self-employed, the sick and the unemployed in the UK are manifestly inadequate. That's their quote. Manifestly inadequate. The UK is now not in conformity with a number of legal obligations in the European Social Charter, which is a legally binding economic and social counterpart to the European Convention on Human Rights. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. He's making an impassioned speech, and I respect his position on these matters. However, it is worth asking. The Scottish Government, since 2016, have had powers to top up reserve benefits. They have a wide range of powers, in fact, in relation to welfare matters. What does the SNP government in Scotland intend to do in relation to these benefits? I'm interested to hear.
Well, the honourable member will be aware, obviously, that the new Scottish Social Security Agency bill is currently going through the Scottish Parliament in order that we can bring forward the measures that we want to make changes to the way things are done down here. But also he'll be aware that we have made hundreds of millions of pounds of mitigation spending in the last few years, including to ensure that none of his constituents have to be impacted by the iniquitous bedroom tax. Now, I think we've had enough, and I'm sure if he wishes to, he can stand and have his say later on. And I don't think this order will do much to make up for that lack of conformity that the European Committee of Social Rights has highlighted and which ministers seemed so clueless about. This latest report follows the High Court ruling on the UK Government's changes to personal independence payments, which said the system blatantly discriminates against people with mental health problems, and the report from the UN, which said Tory benefit cuts violate human rights. This government has another new DWP Secretary of State who has thankfully accepted the High Court ruling. Perhaps it is time for her to take a fresh look at all the other areas of international criticism as well. Regarding the pension provisions before us, ministers will not be surprised at my disappointment at another year having gone by without any action on frozen pensions or to sort the state pension inequalities faced by women. Accompanying this order are regulations brought annually by negative procedure which ensure the state pension uprating will not apply to people entitled to the pension living in certain countries around the world. My right honourable friend from Roskilde and Lochaber, along with my honourable friend from Paisley and Renfrewshire South, have been pressing this government on this since their election in 2015. It is an injustice that for some pensioners who have earned the right to it like everyone else, their payments are frozen at the rate first received and for the rest of their life abroad. It's just not right that if you live in some countries your pension continues to rise while in others it is frozen. It affects 550,000 British pensioners, 4% of all recipients of the state pension and half of all those drawing their pension abroad. I give way again.
I agree with what the honourable gentleman said about overseas pensions. I'm sure he'll recall that, I think it was last year, year before, a number of representatives came from different countries to lobby us about this situation because it's been going on for a number of years, and I'm sure we've all had all sorts of emails on the same subject.
We have indeed, and I'm sure I've been copied into the very same emails that the honourable member has as well. It is it's wrong that we still face this injustice, and it's something that this new department, ministerial department, must look at again to ensure that this glaring injustice is acted upon. As they must finally also act to rectify another pension injustice suffered by women born in the 1950s. The WASPI campaign has been the clearest, most persistent and compelling of the dozens we have seen before us in the last 2.5 years. It is a scandal that the UK Government continues to refuse to act to address this issue, which isn't going away. Turning to the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order, we know some with the old state pension system made up of the basic state pension and CERT, or state earnings related pension, people built up national insurance contributions for their basic element, but building up CERTs depending on one's circumstances. We know that some people were contracted out of CERTs, doing so themselves or because their employer did so themselves. Contracting out occurred because it allowed both parties, the individual and the employer, to pay reduced national insurance contributions. However, to ensure some standard was maintained, the employer had to guarantee that their company pension would at least match the CERTs the employer would have received if they hadn't been contracted out. And this is the guaranteed minimum pension. This system ran for a number of years in the 1970s, 1980s and 90s, but was discontinued by the Labour government. And now the new state pension works in a completely different way. Complicated rules apply regarding uprating depending on when the pension was built up. We know that different people will be impacted in different ways, but people who are extensively contracted out may just receive the basic state pension, and for some people this may come as a shock. Clearly this is an extremely complex matter, and we know that people are struggling to understand their circumstances as a result. So our main concern with regards to this order is that the UK Government ensures people are adequately informed of the impact the new state pension has on their own pension pots. Not all of those who are contracted out were made fully aware of how this was to impact their eventual pension pot. And while it's good that there is a minimum guarantee linked to CPI, there are also some adverse impacts for people in some cases. For example, we understand the government changes to the state pension mean that any GMPs that people have accrued between 78 and 88 will not be uprated, and that a maximum of 3% each year will be uprated for GMPs built up between 88 and 97. This applies to those who will retire after the 6th of April 2016. Whether or not you benefit from this depends on your circumstances, and some people will get less money than they expected. And people who were contracted out were not necessarily aware or understood what this meant at that time, and certainly could not have anticipated that the retirement income would be impacted by such future changes as the government has made to the state pension. For those without further savings to fall back on, like many of the WASPy women, this can mean a loss in income. Now, the UK Government should have communicated the impact of these changes better for those who are contracted out. All in all, Madam Deputy Speaker, what this points to is the urgent need for an independent pensions commission to be established. This government continues to ignore the needs of pensioners, as well as the looming pensions and savings crisis we may well encounter in the future. This government needs to ensure people's retirement savings are put on a sustainable footing so that future generations can plan for their future. And the SNP has long called for the establishment of that Independent Pensions Commission to ensure that employees' savings are protected and a more progressive approach to fairer savings is looked at as we move to a period where defined benefit schemes are becoming a thing of the past and as the new state pensions begin to take effect. And the need for that independent commission is more important than ever.
Yes.
Kate Green.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And while I too am pleased to see that there has been uprating of a number of benefits in the Social Security Benefits Uprating Order, overall I am disappointed in the order and for the reasons that were outlined both by my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth, and the honourable member for Airdrie and Shotts, because in too many cases, in failing to offer any uprating at all of certain benefits, they serve to embed meanness into our social security system, particularly against the backdrop of rising prices that we've heard about. And we see, Madam Deputy Speaker, a number of specific instances in this order where the government quite simply says the benefit rate remains unchanged, in other words, frozen, despite the rise in prices. So we see it, for example, for income support, for job seekers allowance. I was quite shocked to see it for the bereavement support grant. And of course, what we also know from my honourable friend, the member for Oldham East and Saddleworth, is that the consequence of the freeze and other cuts will be a very significant rise in the number of children growing up in poverty. The consequence will be huge hardship for families. We have already seen food bank use rise tenfold over the last decade. It will increase further. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has reported that the lowest income households are already struggling with personal debt and paying their bills. Their situation will simply worsen as a result of these frozen benefits. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, in particular, that the decision to impose this freeze for a period of 4 years is frankly wicked. In a civilised society, our social security system is here to meet need, and there is no way the government can assure this House that it will do so if prices continue to rise over that period while benefits remain frozen. Madam Deputy Speaker, contrary to what the government appears to believe, meanness, a lack of generosity in the system, doesn't improve its legitimacy. One thing, conversely, that does improve the legitimacy of the system is to recognise contribution. And so it's very depressing that the opportunity is missed in this order to improve a number of the contributory benefits that it covers. Because we have a ridiculous situation where some contributory benefits are being reduced pound for pound from the equivalent means-tested benefit. And while this isn't a new problem, it's being exacerbated by the introduction of universal credit. So, for example, income-based job seekers allowance and universal credit is not taxable, but contributory-based job seekers allowance is both deducted from universal credit pound for pound, and then it's taxed into the bargain, leaving the claimant worse off than the claimant who hasn't contributed. You see a similar situation with widowed parents' allowance, which is based on a deceased partner's contribution record, and because universal credit brings together a number of benefits in one single payment, deductions of contributory benefits can be taken not just from the equivalent income-based component of universal credit, but from other help in universal credit, for example, for housing costs or the payments that are in universal credit to support the cost of raising children. So, while, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I say, this problem isn't new, in some respects it is being made worse. And I hope that the House will uniformly agree that to penalise people who have made a contribution in this way is not actually moral. So disregarding at least a proportion of contributory benefit for the purpose of calculating means-tested entitlement would be a powerful recognition that people should be rewarded, not penalised, for making a contribution. And that is important for building confidence in the social security system. It's also, I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, a matter of simple justice. So, as I say, I find these orders at best disappointing, in some respects downright cruel, perverse and unethical. And I urge the Minister to make good on these defects and to do so as a matter of urgency.
Stephen Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a privilege to respond to the Social Security Benefits Uprating Order on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. As the Minister knows, there's by law since 1992 the government must increase the value of certain disability benefits in line with inflation, so I'm pleased to see that these, which are attendance allowance, carers allowance, DLA and PIP, will be going up by 3%. As a colleague from the SNP flagged, I would also put on record that whilst I appreciate the government recognising they'd made a tremendous mistake around the PIP issue for people with mental health issues, I'm glad that it is going up by the 3%, but I'm quite sure that for many, many people on PIP with mental health, for the next number of months, while that absolute shambles is sorted out, I doubt whether they probably would appreciate the 3% as much as they may have done if the government hadn't been so foolhardy in the first place. Also, I value the fact that the pensions credit and the widowed pensions in industrial death benefits is going up by 2.2%. In fact, the widow pension by 3%. I also, to be fair, I appreciate the government has at its discretion increased working age benefits for disabled people in line with inflation, particularly around the support group component, because as the Minister will be aware, people on support group ESA are people with a profundity of disability, which means they cannot work irrespective of the support they get, and so I think the government increased that by 3%. I do welcome that. The state pension triple lock, it's always good to see that. I was here in coalition the last time, and I'm delighted to see the government implementing Lib Dem policy and continuing to do so. It's going up by 3% this year. I would also, though, flag, as a number of colleagues have already done, I'm disappointed that the government didn't use the opportunity to give some succour to the many, many women born in their 50s around WASPI. This could have been a good opportunity to at least send a message that the government is listening and is prepared to come up with something that I think would solve a lot of frustration and anger for many millions of women across the country. As I've said before in this House, I believe all the parties are culpable on this. The Conservatives originally with the Pensions Act by bringing it in and then not telling anyone, Labour for 13 years afterwards, and the Coalition. So as we're all culpable, I would hope that we could work together to actually come up with some sort of transition payment that I think the WASPI women deserve. In fact, I believe profoundly the WASPI women deserve, so I'm disappointed the government didn't mention that, or the Minister. More importantly, moving on to the elements that I'm not happy with. In accordance with the Welfare Reform and Work Act in 2016, as the previous speaker addressed the House, working age benefits are frozen until April 2020. Without going through the whole list, the consequence of these are going to be absolutely deplorable. I'll give two examples. First off, Child Poverty Action Group has identified, and the Resolution Foundation have identified, that single parents, on average, from this year onwards, for the next 4 years, stand to lose, on average, £2,380 per annum. That is an enormous amount of money to lose from your annual budget. I mean, I'm on a very good salary. We're all on very good salaries here. I would notice if suddenly £2,380 as an average was taken out of my salary. For single parents to have to experience that and suffer that over the next 4 years, I think is just absolutely wrong. And I'm really very, very disappointed that the government are continuing, despite all the evidence to the contrary from very robust, independent, reputable organisations like the Roundtree Association, the Roundtree Trust, the Resolution Foundation and many more, that the impact that the benefits freeze is having, as the previous speaker said, spoke so eloquently, I think is cruel. Yes, certainly.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and I'm sure it was touched on earlier in actual fact. One of the consequences of this is, although people have not been assisted with burials in particular, because nobody ever actually looks at burial charges, more important, I don't know whether he's noticed, but the number of pauper burials is actually starting to increase in this country. Surely that's quite an indictment.
I thank the honourable member for the intervention, and he may or may not know, but an additional part of the benefits freeze is that the bereavement support payment is frozen. So, I mean, this is just unacceptable. But again, I will put on the record, I really will keep banging on about the single parents cut until... Yes, I'll certainly...
To the honourable gentleman, he's absolutely right to highlight how particularly unfair these freezes are to single parents, because as the sole carer of their children, it's obviously extremely difficult for them to increase their family income through increasing their hours in work. Would you agree, therefore, that there should be special attention to their needs in the benefit system?
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I heartily agree. If you're looking at over 2 million parents, 2 million single parents, single families, that's however many millions of children, that will be a devastating effect if this government does not address that issue very, very quickly. If they leave it for another 4 years, I can barely comprehend the damage that will do to many of our children. The other thing that I'm disappointed with, and that is something called RAG, which is work-related benefit, part of ESA, and this is for disabled people who it is recognised, they recognise, and people in the DWP working with them recognise that they have the capacity to work. It's just that they would need a certain amount of support as a consequence of their disability to get back into work. It's an area that I've been very supportive of for many, many years before I came into politics, because I totally share the view of many others in the chamber that work and employment is the best way out of poverty, the best way towards self-respect. And the government, after coalition, because I can tell you the Liberals wouldn't have allowed it, after coalition they cut RAG by 30%. And I see that that hasn't changed, and in fact what they're looking at is removing RAG completely. Now, I would ask members of the chamber, if you have a disability and you've been unemployed for 5, 6, 7 years, but you want to get back into work, you're supported by the local job centre plus, DWP, but because you've been away from work for a long time, obviously there's a lack of confidence there, but gently you'll start being directed and guided and assisted and mentored into work. Now imagine the DWP then say, oh, by the way, we're going to remove your income by 30%. What do you think that's going to do to your self-confidence? What do you think that's going to do for your determination to stay within RAG? Well, I can tell you with human nature, being human nature, what will happen is more and more disabled people will try to move into the support group, which means that it actually ends up costing the state more. And I also think it shows a complete lack of understanding of both disability and human nature. Bad move. The work allowance. Again, after the Liberals were defenestrated in 2015, George Osborne, one of the first things he did, your former colleague, now editor of the Standard, slashed £3 billion per annum from the work allowance from universal credit. The whole point behind universal credit, the reason I was so supportive of it with my colleague who was speaking earlier on the work and pensions, despite the clunky bits, the one thing that really drew me to universal credit was that the work allowance meant that it really did make work pay. By removing £3 billion per annum since then and going on for the next 4 years, it doesn't make work pay. It's completely counterproductive, and the Tories and the government have kept all the worst elements of universal credit and dumped the best element, which was the work allowance. I already spoke earlier in the chamber to a minister, one of the other ministers of the DWP, and pointed out to him, Madam Deputy Speaker, that one of the elements of universal credit that isn't working is for people who are self-employed, because of the minimum income floor, because people who are self-employed will earn X amount of money one month, Y the next. It can be less or more. The way that the universal credit is designed, it can mean at the end of 12 months, someone who is self-employed who perhaps earned £15,000 on universal credit against someone who is employed earning £15,000 or £20,000 on universal credit, and guess what? The person who is self-employed will receive less benefit. So actually the Conservative Party, which always trumpets itself as an aspirational party, is specifically working against people who are self-employed, which I just think is absolutely dark. Housing benefit for 18 to 21-year-olds, as we know, the government has abolished, while housing benefit payments in the private rented sector have been frozen since 2016. So, sorry?
Over here.
Over here. Sorry, I've only got one here. Thank you. Yes, I'll give way.
Thank you very much. Would you agree that the freezing, the cancelling of benefits for under 21s then leads to a perverse incentive where if young people are in supported accommodation, it doesn't actually make any sense for them to leave that and go back into ordinary housing rental because they can't afford it?
I thank Honourable Member for the intervention. My only challenge is I've only got one ear on the right side, so thank you very much for that. I appreciate that, Madam Deputy Speaker. That is such a good point. And again, it's a false economy, because all it does, it will lead, I think, to more dysfunction and challenging situations in families. I think it will prevent younger people becoming independent, and I think it will cost the state more money. So, drawing my remarks to a close, I'm just going to come back to that issue with single parents once more, because I would urge that the Minister, in taking responsibility for his government, listen to this figure. There are over 2 million single parents in this country with X number of millions of children. Under the benefits freeze for the next 4 years, they stand to lose nearly £2,500 per year from their benefit. That is not people with a lot of money. That is people trying to bring up their children. That is, in my view, something that is absolutely unacceptable. I would urge the Minister, when he does respond, that he doesn't ignore that important issue and say something on it that perhaps we can take back to those many, many hundreds of thousands of single parents. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
David Linden.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this relatively short though very necessary debate. And can I first say how encouraged I was to see the word social security actually appear in the order paper for this debate today, and to see it in the enunciator, because over the years we seem to have sadly moved away from talking about social security to welfare and then latterly to benefits. And tempting though it is, I think I'll resist the temptation to lambast members of this House, particularly on the benches opposite, for the use of their words like scroungers and skivers and this kind of divide and conquer mentality that we see from the party opposite. I see they're joking up. But the title of today's debate today, as the honourable gentleman's chuntering from a sedentary position, does he want to intervene? No, perhaps not. But the title of today's debate is, I think, a good reminder to us. I'm more than happy to give way in.
To intervene on him. Could he give the precise constituency of the member he suggested said the words that he used?
Chancellor, so I think it was Tatton. He now writes for the Evening Standard, so that's exactly who it is indeed. It wasn't so long ago that members opposite were charging away behind him and saying how wonderful he was. But whilst the benches opposite will chunter away, I will make progress with my speech. But the reason I rise to express my profound disappointment at the UK Government's continued obsession with the punitive benefits freeze is why I want to speak tonight, because as a constituency MP I'm acutely aware that the clear majority of people that I speak to at my surgeries on a Friday do not choose to be on benefits. Largely it would be circumstances that would dictate that, and broadly speaking people who end up receiving state support do so because they're disabled, because they're sick and because they're out of work. And contrary to what some right-wing newspapers print, being on benefits does not constitute a life of luxury. And if people outside or indeed in the benches opposite genuinely believe that, then they ought to go and study the annual statistics from the Trussell Trust that show quite clearly that the top 3 reasons why people use food banks are changes or delays in benefits, low income at work and insecure employment. And the charge for all 3 of them falls squarely at the door of this Tory government. Now, for the purposes of this debate, though, I shall stick predominantly to social security, and I know that my honourable friends from Inverness and Badenoch and Strathspey and North... I'm more than happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable gentleman for giving way. He says that with great assurance that it all lies at the door of this government. In fact, since 2016, the Scottish Government have had powers to adjust, to top up, to change, to introduce new benefits, and in fact the Scottish Government, Madam Deputy Speaker, have done none of these things. The only thing they have done is they've made some changes to the way that universal credit can be changed, but they have the power at their disposal in the Scottish Government to be able to change the benefits package in Scotland. Why don't they do it?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for Stirling for that speech, and I perhaps want to have a glass of water after that. And I know often that Scottish Conservative members come to this chamber and act as these kind of Rottweilers that like to have a go at the Scottish Government. I think after a certain amount of time, members in the benches opposite will realise that they have been sent here from their constituencies to hold the United Kingdom government to account. Now, until that happens, I'm more than happy to debate with the honourable gentleman about the powers that the Scottish Government's taken on. No, you can sit down for a wee minute. But the powers that the Scottish Government are taking forward with social security, which is, I think, his remarks tonight are actually quite disappointing, because what we see in the Scottish Parliament, broadly speaking from the Conservative Party, is a good cross-party consensus moving forward. And I think the way that he stood up tonight and made that rather pathetic intervention is perhaps just a little bit of an insult towards his colleagues in the Scottish Conservative and Rate Clause Party. But as I say, as a constituency MP, I'm acutely aware that people do not choose to be on benefits. And I think what we need to see is a government that is willing to stand up and build a country that works for everyone. We can't have this just on the side of buses. And I think of, for example, the general election campaign. We were talking about building a country that works for everyone. If you're serious about building a country that works for everyone, that's got to be everyone. Now, I know that not everybody, the people in the benches opposite decide to denigrate and they decide to have a go at might not vote for them, but the reality is that they need to give them more support. I want to, because I'm conscious of time and I want to give the Minister the opportunity to sum up as well, but I want to place on record my concern about the lack of support for the WASPy women. One of the first things that I did as an MP was bring forward a lot of the women in my constituency who have been unfairly impacted by this government's attack on women born in the 1950s. But in the remaining time I have, I want to issue a plea to the government tonight to halt the rollout of universal credit in the city of Glasgow, to end the benefits freeze, and in particular to scrap the medieval and barbaric two-child policy. And before I entered this House, I worked for my honourable friend, I'm very glad to see she's here, the member for Glasgow Central, and she has doggedly pursued the government over its barbaric rate clause and medieval two-child policy. Barbaric. More than happy to give out, my honourable friend.
The honourable member raises the point about the rate clause. The members opposite had asked about MPs in this House who had said things that we wouldn't quite accept were right. And the honourable member for Mansfield said that people who should have vasectomies rather than have children because they are free. So would he agree that those kind of attitudes, that poor people are having hundreds of children just to scrounge in the state, are completely untrue as well as being unacceptable?
Very grateful to my honourable friend. I think that brings me on quite nicely to the next point, and I'm sure that the honourable gentleman opposite, who takes a keen interest in these matters, will be quite concerned about the whole idea that government policy is meant to go through a family test. And so for honourable gentlemen like the honourable gentleman from Mansfield to start suggesting that poor people should go and have vasectomies, I think is deeply, deeply worrying, and gives a real insight to the mindset of a Tory MP. Why not? On you go, Baron.
Simple question. Does the honourable gentleman accept that the Scottish Government has now power over things like tax credits? And you haven't done anything with those powers in the Scottish Government. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Scottish Government haven't done anything with those powers since 2016. So when they stand up and give these virtue signalling speeches about concern and compassion, they have the power, if they think something's needs to be fixed, to fix it.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I must say that I'm quite entertained, at least, by the fact that the honourable gentleman from Stirling did not come tonight and is perhaps seeking to catch your eye to make a speech. He's instead decided he's going to try and use my speech as an opportunity to once again attack the Scottish Government. Now, the honourable gentleman must spend so much... He's not even listening, Madam Deputy Speaker, so I don't know if I should be continuing to address the point. But the point is that members from the Conservative Party in Scotland come to this House and they use the opportunity to rail against the Scottish Government as much as possible, yet he's absolutely no clue that tax credits are not being devolved to the Scottish Government. If he had spent any time in advance of this debate, even reading the order, he would know that that was the case. But despite widespread condemnation from every corner of the globe, including the United Nations, ministers on the Treasury bench have pursued the two-child policy, which would frankly make China blush. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies have said that the two-child cap, which is tantamount to social engineering, will mean around 600,000 three-child families will lose £2,500 a year on average. That's families in Stirling losing £2,500 a year because of the policy of this government. That's not £2,500 a year on catalogues, gambling or lavish nights out. It's £2,500 a year that should go towards hot, nutritious meals for low-income families like the children in my constituency of Glasgow East. And the reality is that under this uncaring Tory government, we are watching child poverty go through the roof, whilst living standards go through the floor. Now, the other debate I am planning to take part on this week is the issue of free school meals. Madam Deputy Speaker, 21st century Britain has now arrived at a point where, due to the sheer levels of poverty in our communities, the only place some children can get a hot, decent meal is at school. And only last week, MPs on all sides of this chamber voted to spend billions of pounds tarting up this royal palace so we can enjoy yet more luxury. Yet tonight, we are being asked by the Minister to support an order that would continue the benefit freeze for some of the most... No, I will not give way at this time. But that would give a benefit freeze to some of the most vulnerable people in our constituencies. And that is something that is fundamentally wrong, and I think it's time we called that out, and I think it's time for an end to the punitive benefit freeze.
Here.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to focus on the pensions aspect of this debate. And we would all agree that it's the duty of the United Kingdom Government to make sure that pensioners fully understand the impact that changes in their pension will have on their retirement planning. And this is, of course, an extremely complex matter, and we know that many people struggle to understand the impact changes in their pension will have on their pension pots. And the movement from a basic state pension and a state earnings-related pension, commonly known as SERPs, to a one-off calculation is a matter which is far from straightforward, and it does have and it will have an impact on people's ability to understand their pension pots. Indeed, some people who have been extensively contracted out will just get the basic state pension figure. And we've heard tonight from the honourable member from Airdrie and Shotts that it is good that there will be a minimum guarantee linked to the Consumer Price Index, but there's also some adverse impacts. We know, for example, that those who were contracted out were not necessarily aware or understood what this meant at the time, and certainly could not and would not have anticipated that the retirement income in the future would be impacted upon negatively by the changes as the Government has made to the state pension. For those without savings to fall back on, of course, and hit very hard are the WASPy women, a significant loss of income and real hardship. The fact is, and many of us are tired of saying it, and I hope the Minister isn't tired of hearing it, because he's hearing it but he doesn't seem to be listening. His government are not listening. That the UK Government should have communicated the impact of these changes better for those who were contracted out. It's absolutely imperative that the UK Government make sure that they are adequately informing people, as they have a duty to do, of the impact of the new state pension on people's pension pots. And this is worth saying because, apart from those on the government benches, just about everybody, I think, agrees that the UK Government has completely failed in this duty with regard to WASPy women. With changes to the 1995 Act bringing in changes in 2010, It was only from 2009 onwards that women were being written to, and many were simply not being told, and so were completely unaware of the changes being made to their pensions. This is an appalling abdication of responsibility and shows a complete disregard for the impact such changes would have on the lives of those affected. And we know that so many women, so many WASPy women, were simply unaware of the changes, but the government, as I have said, has not been listening. But it's worth remembering that DWP research carried out in 2004 found that less than half of women surveyed were aware of the impact the changes would have on their state pension age, with levels of awareness particularly low for those who would arguably be worst affected, women who were economically inactive. In addition, the Pensions Committee in 2005 said that a policy of significant notice of any increase, for example around 15 years, should be possible. And in 2008, the Pensions Advisory Service also reported low levels of knowledge about the state pension and said this must be addressed by the government. So the warning signs were all there, despite how much the UK government insists that it did enough to inform women of changes to their pension age. But I believe that this whole episode has undermined the social contract that the state pension represents. If you don't believe that, then perhaps it's worth spending 5 minutes with a WASPy woman. With contracting out and its impacts, it's extremely important that the government tells the House what provisions are in place now and have been previously to ensure that people are fully informed of the impact on this on their own pension pots. Because if some are unable to make ends meet due to having lower payments because of contracting out, the government needs to explain what support and advice is to be made available to them. But the fact is that pensions are far too important to be kicked about by governments of different political persuasions. Once again, we in the SNP, and we've heard it tonight as well from the member for Airdrie and Shotts, we are asking for an independent pension commission, and we will continue to do so, because only then can we properly address the needs of pensioners and prepare for the looming pensions and savings crisis which many fear will come to pass. And I would draw the Minister's attention to the spike in pensioner poverty, which shows that many of those in the over 60 age bracket are being failed by the government. I will indeed.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. On that particular issue, would the honourable member agree with me that perhaps one way forward is for actually the Parliamentary Ombudsman to look at what was clearly the poor quality communication from the 1995 Act onwards and make a ruling whether the communication was good enough or bad enough, because at least there we will find out for sure what I think is true, that there was poor communication, and it would rely on the Parliamentary Ombudsman to give us that steer.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his insight. Yes, that is actually an idea worth pursuing, but I fear that the WASPy women are in a position now where they feel, rather sadly, that the only option left to them is now through the courts and a legal challenge. And I think if this is how this matter if this is where this matter finds itself, I think that in itself is an indictment of the government letting these women down. But either way, the WASPy women are not going to go away, and it may be through the Parliamentary Ombudsman, it may be through the courts, but I think this matter is far from over. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has said that over the last 4 years, 300,000 more pensioners have been driven into poverty. And it's worth noting that this is the first sustained increase in pension poverty for over 20 years. And that on its own should give us pause for thought. I see the Minister shaking his head, but that is a matter he should really take up with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who I think are a very credible organisation. But the attack on pensioners has been really rather sustained, and we saw this in the government's own election campaign when there was an attack on the triple lock. There was talk, in fact there was a threat of a dementia tax. Now thankfully those threats have receded because it cost the government its majority, but it really is a matter that requires the government's full attention. It really should reflect on the electoral consequences as well as the moral consequences of these attacks. But according to the European Commission research from 2015, the UK has a wider than average gender pensions gap. We are trailing behind the rest of Europe in how we treat our pensioners, and I think that's a matter that the government should take very seriously. After the WASPI fiasco, it is true to say that confidence in pensions has been undermined, whilst at the same time we are trying to encourage younger generations to plan for their future. Those two situations don't sit side by side very comfortably. An independent pensions commission would ensure that employee savings are protected and a more progressive approach for fairer savings is looked at as we move to a period where we're moving towards new state pensions taking effect. The need for an independent commission is needed more than ever, and it really is the time for the government to look seriously at this in the long-term interests of pension security, and I urge the Minister to do so.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I can also commend my honourable friend from Adrian Shotts for covering the issues so completely in his speech earlier, and welcoming those changes that are there to be welcomed, whilst making the criticisms that are due to be made. Also, my honourable colleague from Glasgow East has covered many of the points that I would normally make in a speech like this very, very succinctly. And as we've just heard from my colleague from North Ayrshire, and Aaron, who has also covered the issues over pensions, and particularly a subject that's dear to my heart, which is the treatment of the WASPI women. So given that ground, that territory has been covered so completely, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to concentrate on one particular aspect that we face from this. That's the fact that most working age benefits will now be frozen in cash terms from the period of 2015 to 16 to 2019-20 inclusive. Continued freeze on social security in light of consumer price index figures at 3%. That means I will make some progress. That means punishing costs for families that are trapping thousands of them and their children in poverty. All they have to look forward to, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the noose getting tighter every year. Madam Deputy Speaker, the fall in the pound has seen food prices rise at their fastest rate in 4 years, up 4%. Meat prices up nearly 4%. Vegetables up in price by nearly 6%. Even the prospect of taking refuge in a cup of tea is even more unaffordable as coffee, tea and cocoa prices soar over 8% higher. We are talking in these debates. I'm going to make some progress. I will come back to you. We are talking in these debates about the effect on families at their kitchen tables, about them eating and about them making choices.
Absolutely.
And I think that is something that we do well when we're going through the technical nature of these debates to reflect on. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
The Honourable Member for giving way. The Honourable Member stated that all these people have to look forward to, and then went on to talk about benefits. Aren't benefits supposed to be temporary and about getting people into work? Aren't these people actually looking forward to getting into work, which is what this government is actually doing and investing into?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is clearly part of the problem, the understanding of the real lives of people, because we're not just talking about those people out of work. We're talking about a whole range of people, including those suffering in-work poverty. Now, this is all at the time as a result of, as I'm going to make some more progress. I will cover your points. The honourable gentleman from Stirling has asked the question twice. I'm going to cover that later on. All the time, as a result of this government, vital support remains frozen. 1 in 4 children are growing up in poverty as a result. Now, we already know that, and we've heard in this debate that thanks to research from the Child Poverty Action Group, that children from well-off families outperform their low-income counterparts at age 3 to 5. And by age 5, there is a gap of 10 months in problem-solving development and 13 months in vocabulary. 3-year-olds in households with incomes below £10,000 are 2.5 times more likely to suffer chronic illness than children in households with incomes above £52,000. There are also strong links between the experience of child poverty and poor mental health. One study shows that children living in low-income households are nearly 3 times as likely to suffer mental health problems than those in better-off households. So why doesn't this government accept the damage that's being done? In Scotland, tackling child poverty is at the heart of decision-making, and I will give way to the honourable gentleman for Stirling.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way unbidded. I'll ask the honourable gentleman the same question. I don't dispute or question the sincerity or the passion that the members opposite have in relation to this issue. But since 2016, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish Government have had powers to top up reserved benefits. And so if the members that represent the SNP in this House feel as passionately as they do, what is it that the government in Scotland, the SNP government, are going to do in practical terms to change? The Honourable...
Before I take the point of order, we can't have interventions from a sedentary position upon someone who is intervening upon another honourable gentleman, and we can't have such long interventions, and this debate has not got much longer to go. Point of order, sir.
Point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over the course of this debate, the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Stirling, has intervened on several occasions on myself and my honourable friends in the course of this debate. Can you clarify if the Honourable Gentleman had indicated to you that he was seeking to catch your eye and speak in the substantive debate, or is it the case that no backbenchers from the Council...
That is not a point of order. That is not a point of order. Any member of this House may try to intervene on any other member, and it's up to the member who has the floor whether they take the intervention or not, and we will not waste time on points of order at this point. Drew Hendry.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we've heard now in some painstaking detail the grandiloquence of the honourable member from Stirling on this point, where he has spectacularly failed not once, not twice, but thrice to make the point. Well, let me answer that for you directly. In Scotland, tackling child poverty is at the heart of decision-making. Now, Scotland is now the only UK nation to have child poverty targets set out in law. The Tories scrapped them for the whole of the UK, and now we know why. In Scotland, we have initiatives to see fairness delivered. The Poverty and Inequality Commission, a new £50 million fund to tackle child poverty. We're using the limited social security powers to support young families at key stages of... I'm going to make some progress. This is a question that needs answered. We're using the limited social security powers to support young families at key stages of children's lives with the Best Start grant. Free childcare up to 45%. Free school meals for primary 1 to 3. Expanding all early years. Mitigating the Tory bedroom tax. Maintaining council tax benefits. And the Scottish Welfare Fund. I will give way.
Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Would the Honourable Gentleman confirm for me in this House tonight, which may be of interest to the members opposite, is he telling us that the Scottish Government have put in all these measures to tackle child poverty in the face of a £2.6 billion cut over 10 years?
Well, my honourable friend makes that point extraordinarily well. This is against a background of having to backfill the poverty and misery caused by UK Tory policies. The lessons could be learned. Madam Deputy Speaker, will they be? They should, to provide justice, fairness and dignity. And indeed, in order to achieve that aim, in order to achieve that aim, they must be seen to be done. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is shameful that we have to fight policies such as the cap and freeze when children in Scotland and across the nations of the UK are condemned to poverty by them. The UK Government should wake up to the harm it is doing and end this policy and the dogmatic approach through austerity that is driving it.
Minister, Mr. Kit Malthouse.
With your leave, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been a lively debate, certainly more lively than it has been in the past, and no doubt many of the arguments that were made, not least since much of the debate was about what's not in the order, rather than what's in the order, many of the arguments that have been made were exactly the same as last year, so I don't propose to detain the House too much. A number of members raised a series of detailed points, which I will try and address in writing if I can, if I fail to address them in my speech. The Honourable Lady on the front bench opposite raised a couple of issues that I just wanted to address. First of all, she asked when will the government produce a cumulative impact assessment of all welfare reforms. The Treasury published a cumulative distributional analysis alongside the budget in November last year, showing the impacts of household income on tax, welfare and expenditure, and I would point her towards that. In particular, she also asked about the new state pension communications, as did a number of other members, and she'll be pleased to know that following the NAO report from which the Honourable Lady quoted last year, the DWP has now launched an online Check Your State Pension Service. I'll just carry on. Check Your State Pension Service, and there have been 7 million views of this service since February 2016. Notwithstanding that, there obviously is more work to do around communication. The Honourable Member for Hendry and Shotts raised an issue around bereavement support payments, why it hadn't been uprated. Bereavement support payment is not a cost of living benefit and is paid in addition to means-tested benefits to protect the least well-off. It's therefore not necessary to uprate it in line with the cost of living. Unlike bereavement allowance and widowed parents' allowance, bereavement support payment is paid in addition to other benefits the recipient is entitled to, helping those on the lowest incomes the most. And he will know that the upfront payment has been increased for those with children from £2,000 to £3,500. There is a wider point. I don't really want to have time. The honourable gentleman and his friends had plenty to say during the debate. There is a wider point, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, which has been raised by a number of members, which I guess distills for me the difference between the sides of the House here, which is that there seems to be a kind of Stockholm Syndrome attachment to the old benefit system on the opposition benches, despite the fact that this system is very obviously a fraud perpetrated upon the poor, more often than not designed to keep them poor, rather than give them the tools and the ladders to climb to take control of their own lives and take financial control of that of their families into the future. While I understand their motivations and would never seek to doubt their motivations to do the best by their constituents and the rest of the country, for some reason they seem to think that applies only to them rather than to us on this side of the House too. But I would like to reassure you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the motivation of every Conservative Member of Parliament is the betterment and welfare of our fellow citizens, and that's what this order is designed to do. And with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to move the first of the two motions.
Question is motion number 1 as on the order paper. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call the Minister to move motion number 2 on pensions formally. The question is motion number 2 on pensions as on the order paper. As members of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.